POW camp. The camp's capacity was a maximum of 4,800 prisoners, and we'll take a look around and see what we can find.
Actually, it's taken in Denmark. I had my basic training in Danish bags in Denmark.
I intend to talk to him a lot more when I'm not sweaty.
Where was this taken?
That's also in Denmark.
Have you read this one?
No, that's...
It was probably German armed forces day or so. See, I'm the third one.
There?
Third one, yeah.
Sorry. What actually happened is that many of the PLWs, after they got over here, they came back later and they settled down after the war was over. And they had a good time. So when you visit Camp Hearne, you'll see bits and pieces of the way that it was in 1944, 45, and until the war was over and they got him out. Now everybody knows who General Patton is.
Yes.
He fought in North Africa. He was commander of the 2nd Corps. Now a corps is a part of a larger army. Usually 2 or 3 corps would make up an army. In North Africa though, we were just getting started. We were just trying to understand how we were going to fight. They went from 4 infantry regiments down to 3 in a division. And they began for triangulation. They changed a lot of things. They changed weapons. They thought the 37mm cannons would be great until they tried to hit German armor and it just kind of bounced off. And then they tried the 75, 76 millimeter stuff on the Germans, and it just kind of bounced off. So they figured they needed to have heavier cannons and artillery, and they had planes to knock out the stuff. So it was a learning process. And in Africa was the area that people learned to train and learned to be part of the soldiers. And we didn't do too well in some of the battles. In the movie, you'll see, how many of you seen the Patton movie? I mean, just okay, let me correct something there. You remember when George Weeks, his orderly, is putting on his helmet and so forth and so on, and Codman's there, and they said, well, you know, I hear that Rommel wasn't in the fight today. And he says, well, if you defeated his plan, you defeated Rommel. And the maneuver before that, he said, I read your book, you magnificent bastard, I read your book. Well, let me tell you what really happened. Friedenthal was not the bad commander that the movie shows him to be. He got caught up by taking orders and going someplace that he didn't really want to be because they were surrounded and didn't have the high ground. And because they lost, they needed a scapegoat. Now, Friedenthal later went on into the States and commanded and did well. And he retired as one of our nation's heroes. But you wouldn't tell it by the movie. The idea of reading the book wasn't out yet. Rommel wrote a book in 1914 called Infantry Attacks. And Patton really didn't get around to reading it until Europe. And he didn't read the passage that he was talking about that's brought out into the movie until November of 1944. Because what they did, they found a copy of Rommel's book. They had it translated to English, and then they issued it to the general commanders, and they didn't get it till 1944. So he hadn't really read Infantry Attacks. He did read it later, but not in the movie. Now, when the movie starts out, you see Patton standing there with all the medals, and he gives this big speech. First of all, he only wore that uniform one time with all the medals, and that was when he came back to the States to sell war bonds, and he never wore it in front of anybody. He wore it at his wife's, at their house in Boston. They had a doctor friend who kind of came back, and my wife Beatrice said, Georgie, would you put on all the medals so we can take a picture in it? Well, okay, because, you know, Patton had a boss. It was his wife. So he put all the medals on, and they went out to his backyard. He owned a ranch out there, and they took several pictures in color. 3 of the pictures still remain today. Now, I have a book that I've written about Patton's photographic book. It's for sale on the inside, and on one of those pages, you'll actually see the actual medals, or several. You'll see the medals he won, and him actually having that picture in uniform with the deal, and it has a picture of Pierre Johnson, the man who took the picture. So the movie where he gives a speech that he never gave, he didn't give that speech. I put the real speech in there, and then I told you what was wrong with the movie speech that he didn't say. First of all, Patton loved his soldiers. He would not have called them bastards. Now, he had a few bastards in his force, but he didn't call it that. So the movie comes up, and he said, I want you to remember that no bastard ever won his war for die for his country. He made the other 4 dumb bastards die for him. He didn't say that. He never said it in the speech. His speech started out, men, all this stuff you've heard about not wanting to fight, not wanting to be in battle, is a lot of horse shit. Americans love to fight. All real Americans love the sting of battle. Why, when you were kids, and then he goes on to the speech, you're a champion marble shooter and the rest of that. But then he gets into why are you fighting? And he said that the Nazis were not supermen. They could be defeated, and you're going to defeat them. And he said that you don't have to be a hero on the front line, and we have plenty of heroes on the back lines, the people that string the wire, and the people that drive the trucks, and the cooks. And then he said we had the finest food, the best equipment in the world. And that he pitied the poor bastards that they were going against because they were going to shoot to kill them. They would take a bayonet and they were going to gut them. So they took an amalgamation of a lot of things that he said in the speech and the things that he said privately and put it in the speech for George C. Scott with the medals. So the movie starts out where he's wearing medals he never wore, giving a speech he never said to troops that he never had at a rank he didn't give it in. But other than that, it's pretty good. But so the study of Patton and what he really did far exceeds a movie. Now Patton has become an acronym, and people will say today, we need another Patton. And what they're saying is, we need somebody who has battlefield experience, who goes out, who will fight battles, and really doesn't care about the political correctness of it all. He just wants to win the war. That's where Patton fit in American history. where he gets his fame is from the Battle of the Bulge. His G2, Oscar Koch, had predicted that there was a possibility of a Battle of the Bulge 9 days before the battle. And the way he knew it is he knew where all the German troops were, and he knew where the troops that he was looking for, he couldn't find them. And the entire European continent had German radio traffic, except for one spot that had no radio traffic. So he's missing units, and he's missing radio traffic, and there's enough to have a pretty good little fight. And so he tells Patton, you need to be careful of that spot around the Ardennes. I think they can attack them. And then Patton sent that information up to Bradley, who sent it to Eisenhower, who sent it to Montgomery, who said, not a chance. Guess what? Patton was right. His G2 was right. So there's a lot of history that has gotten lost because people like to read books. Now later on I'll be inside and you're gonna ask me a question. Was Patton murdered, right? They crisscrossed and went into the side of Bastogne, and had he not done that, they wouldn't have been able to get through, because the area that they had that was free to get the tanks in was not very big. Yep. And what was not known is right behind the 4th Armored Division was 70 ambulances and an entire triage.
Hello.
What is it, hello? Why don't you say Gates?
And one of the double agents who was working for us actually got a medal by Hitler because Hitler thought he was working for him.
So, not bad. That's, you know.
That's pretty good.
Pick up
pretty
your
good odds.
where you can. Yeah.
I'll tell you a story that's also not widely known. There's a picture in my book where it shows Patton at talking to Montgomery. It's a well-known picture. It's in Life magazine, all that. And what you don't know is that the picture was taken July the 7th, and they censored it because Patton wasn't still supposed to be known there. And there was a British colonel by the name of Wigginbotham who was in charge of all of the ultra communications. And he saw Patton standing out there with the dog, and he went to Monk, who was Bradley's G2 for intelligence. He says, Patton's not supposed to be out here, and we have all these pictures being taken. And the photographers then, even if you were a correspondent, answered to the Army. Right. So Bradley's G2 came out there and says, I know you think you saw Patton running around out here with a dog, but you didn't. And you won't see him for quite a while. Do you understand? And the picture did not leak out. And when Eisenhower said it was okay to publish about Patton, that's when that picture was used, but it wasn't used for another month and several days. And that's the famous picture. That picture had been used and cropped more times and in more books and more newspapers. And he was only a 3-star general, and you'll see him with standing there with 4 stars, because even when they had negatives, and they could doctor the negatives and make him 4 stars, and that was used as a publicity picture about Patton for the next 70 years. And it's a crop picture that was never supposed to be taken.
Gotcha, gotcha.
Amazing.
Yeah, back then,
Now, here's 10 like marks. Don't spend it all in one place.
What do you say?
Thank you.
You're quite welcome.
maybe he's not that high up, is he?
Was Patton murdered, right? Because you've all heard about Bill O'Reilly's book, Killing Patton? No, he was not murdered. It was an accident. And when I tell you the whole story of how it went down and how it became to be thought of as a murder, because there's 3 different books that says it's a murder. But there's one book that's accurate. The book that's accurate is called The Last Days of Patton. It's written by Ladislav Farago. And he knew all of Patton. And Hap Gay was riding in the back of the touring car when Patton was injured. And he knew Hap Gay, his chief of staff, Major General, riding in the back of him. He was an eyewitness. The MP did not vanish. They know who he was. He was ordered not to make a report, but they have the information. The man who was driving the truck was named Thomas. And for the rest of his life, he was upset because he had caused the accident that killed General Patton. And there was no conspiracy inside the hospital to poison him either. He was a VIP, and at the time of the accident, he was the highest ranking general in the European theater. Eisenhower was home, Bradley was home, so he was in charge of all of Europe. So the highest ranking general gets in an accident, and they take him to the 130th hospital in Heidelberg, and he had the accident in Mannheim, and he had surrounded by MPs, the whole hospital was. It was 7th Army area, and his good French Patch was in charge of it. And Godfrey Keyes, another general, was in charge right out there, and Hap Gay, who was a major general, was there, and they cordoned it off, and then they had MPs in front of his room, and at no time could anybody get in his room at any time. His food was sampled. Everything about it was hush-hush, top secret. Reporters weren't allowed in it. He had the finest doctors in the country, and Sperling came from the States and brought his wife Beatrice there, and he died about maybe 20 seconds after she had just left the room to go to get coffee because she'd been reading to him, and he went to sleep, and he quit breathing. And the nurse, he had somebody in there 24 hours a day, and the nurse saw that he quit breathing. That's the truth. But I'm not trying to sell Killing Patton. I'm trying to tell you what really happened. and I can prove what really happened. And the notes are there, but it's like when you don't have enough information. You know, there wasn't an autopsy, there wasn't an accident report, and so it would make a good idea for a book. And since you've already killed off Jesus, and you killed off who else did he kill off? He killed Lincoln off, and he got Kennedy, and he got Reagan. So he needed somebody to kill off, and so he killed off Patton. And the book, if you're new into history, is a good book because it tells you about Eisenhower, it tells you about all the things going on, and it leaves it a little bit to your imagination whether or not Patton was killed or not by the Russians. And those of you who hadn't read the book, I spoiled it. Oh well, you can buy my book. So anyway, that's that. Now, so we always have a little fun. Do you have any questions? Anything you want to know about Patton? I know it. If I don't know it, I have a great story that'll cover up what I don't know. What would you like to know? Good question. He didn't slap one soldier, he slapped two. Two separate incidents. One of them was named Cruel, and the other one was named Benny. Cruel actually wrote home and said the slapping did him a good job, although his dad was pissed about it. And he went back into service. He graduated, left, retired, and became a janitor. Okay, good job. He lived, and he didn't have any animosity. Bennett, according to the diary that Beatrice wrote, refused to get off the landing craft at Normandy, was arrested and went to Leavenworth. This is according to Beatrice's wife. She had friends that told her what happened to the guy afterward because it was a big deal. But no general should ever slap a soldier. Now, if Patton had done what he should have done, he would have brought him up before a summary court-martial, but there would have been a hearing first, and then there would have been a court-martial, and desertion under fire could have got him shot if they could have proved it. Private Slovic, who was under Bradley's command, did exactly the same thing that these guys were doing, and Bradley put him up against the wall and shot him.
Oops.
Speaking of putting somebody up against the wall, how many stripes did you think you had? And when you were a sergeant corporal, do that again, you'll be a private. He just can't get good help anymore. I'd give him a $20 fine, but he already owes me money for pokers, and I'll never see him again. You know, I'm going to invent something called Velcro one day. And when I do, we're going to give it to this man because the stripes go on and off all the time. Now, I'm kidding, but the real Sergeant Mims, who he plays, was a ladies' man. And he would go out and party. He did it in North Africa, and he did it in Sicily, and he did it in England. And his stripes went up and down, depending. And he was in several times. Patton had to punish him, but he would give him his stripes back. So, and Mims is the principal driver that drove Patton all the way through for 3.5 years. So there are other drivers that did drive him periodically. And I'll tell you a good story. He had a black cook, they called him Blackie. I don't know his real name or I'd tell it to you. And the cook had a big heart. And they were in Europe, and a German supply train had been strafed by our forces and derailed and crashed. And inside the supply train was a huge amount of German food. And some of it was stolen food from France because they were trying to get out of there. And the cook had gone to a monastery not far from there that was run by a lot of nuns, and it was an orphanage. And the orphanage had more orphans there than you could possibly imagine, because you can imagine the bombing and the strafing that was taking place in France. So the cook broke all the Third Army rules and all the Army rules, because you could not give supplies to civilians. If you did, they'd follow the whole army and you couldn't go anywhere. So if they had extra supplies, they would usually destroy them or keep them, but they couldn't give them to civilians. But he saw the orphans, he saw the nuns, so he gave them food. Well, the MPs, which was their job, they caught him. And Patton brought him before him. So you can imagine this cook, he's a sergeant, he's standing before Patton, he's at attention in his office at Nancy France. He's like, you know, he figures this is it. You know, he's going back home. And Patton said, "You know why you're here?" "Yes, sir." "Why are you here?" "Well, I gave food out. I shouldn't have." "Who'd you give it to?" "Well, I gave it to the nuns because of the orphanage and the kids were starving." "Where'd you get the food?" "Well, I got it from the German train because it was derailed." And how'd you get caught? Well, sir, your MV saw me doing it. He said, that's a terrible thing to do. One of my men gets caught for giving food? You ought to be better than that. In the future, I don't want you to get caught, and my MPs are going to make damn sure you don't get caught. And they shipped the rest of the food, and to this day, in that monastery, they light a candle for that sergeant, the Third Army. He knew what real battle was about. He had discipline that he had to enforce. If you broke his rules, you got fined. At least he said you got fined. But there's very seldom anything in any of their paperwork that shows they got fined. Now, one of the things that's always said about Patton, oh, I heard he's a racist. Tell you a story. When they were getting all the troops together for the Normandy invasion, the army was segregated. They had blacks, cooks, and they had black truckers and things like that, but they didn't have fighting forces. And so when the officers and enlisted men, black soldiers went someplace, they had to go to a black area in the army. They didn't have to in England, but they did if they were in the army. And these guys, there was a riot, a race riot that took place. And there was over 20 black soldiers who were arrested for trying to go in someplace that anybody else could go. And they were in jail. O.A. Davis was the highest ranking black general in the army, be brigadier general. And his job, we don't use the word anymore, his job was Negro affairs. We call them, they also used the word colored back then. Black was seldom used, but it was used. And so his job was to check on the colored troops. And so he went to Patton, and they had a talk. A week later, Patton had every one of those black soldiers who were sitting in jail in England before him. And he said, you know what? If you will be good soldiers, we need the troops out there. I'll expunge your record. There'll be no record of it. It'll be done, and you go about your business. Don't screw up. There they went. They were gone. You don't think of that at Patton, but it happened. Then Patton found out that there was an armored brigade that had been training and going around in circles for 3 years, all black. He said, why are they in the States? Well, sir, they're in the States. He knew why they were in the States. He said, send them to me. And they came, and they fought along with the other divisions. And they were one of the finest fighting forces they had out there, and they were highly decorated. And there's a book called The Black Panthers, which is all about them. 761st, I think it's called. And see, you see, so history doesn't always reflect what's going on. He was accused of being anti-Semitic, like he didn't like Jews. You know who his best friend was? Oscar Koch. Guess what religion he happened to be? It didn't matter to him. He didn't care what color they were. He didn't care what religion they were. He wanted good soldiers and people who were confident around him, and he wanted to go kill the Germans. That was the real Patton. It wasn't the storybook Patton, and it wasn't the movie Patton, and it wasn't the trash that you read out on there. Now, he wasn't liked a lot because he did force discipline. And when you went from the 7th Army, or you went from the 5th Army, or you went from the Bradley, and you went into 3rd Army area, you knew the difference. The men wore ties. They had their uniforms as clean as it could be in the field. They had, and if you were at the headquarters, the things were washed. They stood at attention. They were as military as you could possibly get under combat. You could tell the difference from going from one place to the other.
Anyway, thank you all for coming to Camp Hearne, and as you can tell, you can stop him at any moment, and he will give you whatever you want to know. So you can find some shade and get him anytime. He'll be in the back room. He'll sign some books for you. You can buy the book and come find him, and he'll sign it.